Hello and welcome to another gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name's Martin.
And my name is Alex.
Before we begin, we'd like to thank everybody who has subscribed to us this past month. We never thought that our hobby would be so well received and want to express our gratitude to the wonderful people that support us. Now that that's out of the way, let's get straight into the game.
My partner commanders are Thrasios, Triton Hero, and Tymna the Weaver. I keep an opening hand of Eternal Witness, Skull Clamp, Cyclonic Rift, Dig Through Time, Wooded Foothills, Bloodstained Mire, and an Island.
My commander is Breya, Ethereum Shaper. My opening hand contains Slowbad, Goblin Tinkerer, Sphinx Summoner, Nevinyor's Disc, Fabricate, Terramorphic Expanse, Shivan Reef, and a Plains.
Ren's commander is Surak Dragonclaw. He keeps an opening hand containing Yavimaya Elder, Jorah of the Gitu, Stonebrow Krosan Hero, Simic Signet, Simic Growth Chamber, and a Forest.
Last but not least, Neil's commander is Lord of Tresserhorn. His opening hand contains Diagraph Captain, Solemn Simulacrum, Attrition, Army of the Damned, Grixis Panorama, Mutavault, and an Island.
I win the dice roll and start the game off by playing a Wooded Foothills. I then sacrifice my land to search my library for a breeding pool, having it come into play untapped and losing me 3 life. I then cast Birds of Paradise and pass the turn.
In my turn, I play a Terramorphic Expanse and then sacrifice it to find a swamp from my library. I then pass to Ren.
Ren plays a forest and passes to Neil.
For his turn, Neil plays an island. He then passes to Alex.
I start my turn by playing an island and then cast Thrasios, Triton Hero. I then tap my Birds of Paradise and cast Skull Clamp, and pass the turn.
I play Shivan Reef, which I then tap and lose a life to produce a red mana. I use this to cast Slowbad, Goblin Tinkerer, and pass the turn.
Ren plays a command tower and then casts Simic Signet. He then passes turn.
Neil plays Grixis Panorama, and then sacrifices it to search his library for a swamp. With no mana left, he passes the turn to Alex.
I play Bloodstained Mire and immediately sacrifice it, losing a life to find a swamp and put it into play. I then cast my other commander, Tymna the Weaver. I move to combat and decide to attack Ren with Thrasios, given that he has a mana rock in play. He takes the 1 damage, and I move to my post-combat main phase, where I lose 1 life and draw 1 card, thanks to Tymna's ability. I equip Skull Clamp to Tymna, and then pass to Martin.
In my turn, I play a Plains and cast Fabricate. I reveal Chromatic Lantern and put it into my hand before passing to Ren.
For his turn, Ren plays a mountain and then casts Yavimaya Elder. He then passes to Neil.
Neil plays Mutavault and then casts Diagraph Captain. He then passes to Alex.
I start my turn by playing Canopy Vista, which enters untapped as I control 2 basic lands. I then cast Golgari Signet and pass the turn.
In my turn, I fail to draw a 4th land and am forced to cast Chromatic Lantern to stay on curve. I then pass the turn.
Ren begins his turn by playing an island, and then pass the turn without casting anything, with some suspicious commander mana being left open.
For his turn, Neil casts Nightscape Familiar and moves to his end step. Alex then activates Thrasios' ability, scrying 1 and revealing the top card of his library to be Field of Ruin. He puts the land onto the battlefield and moves to his turn.
In my turn, I play Verdant Catacombs and then pass the turn to Martin without attacking anyone.
I start my turn by casting my commander, Breya, Ethereum Shaper. Breya creates 2 1/1 Thopter tokens of flying when she enters the battlefield, giving me some nice sacrifice fodder for Slowbad's ability. I then play Boris Garrison, returning my plains to my hand, and pass the turn to Ren. In response, Ren flashes in his own commander, Surrak Dragonclaw, to the surprise of no one.
In Ren's turn, he casts Stonebrow, Krosan Hero, a card that synergizes very well with Surak's ability to give all of Ren's creatures trample. He then plays a Simic Growth Chamber, returning an island to his hand, and passes turn.
Neil plays Graven Cairns and casts Lightning Reaver. He then attacks Alex with the Hasty Reaver, to which Alex responds by casting Abrupt Decay, targeting Neil's Diagraph Captain. The Captain is destroyed, lowering the Reaver's power and toughness to 3. Alex blocks the Reaver with Tymna, and both creatures are destroyed. Alex gains 3 life as a result of Tymnia's lifelink, and draws 2 cards thanks to Skull Clamp. Neil passes the turn, to which Alex responds by sacrificing his Verdant Catacombs, losing a life to put Temple Garden into play tapped. He then activates Thrasios' ability, revealing a Blue Sun Zenith and putting it into his hand. Alex then moves to his turn.
I start my turn by playing a Polluted Delta and then cast Eternal Witness. I return Abrupt Decay to my hand with the Eternal Witness's Enter the Battlefield trigger, and then pass the turn.
In my turn, I replay my planes and cast Kuldotha Forgemaster. I then go to combat and attack Alex of Breya. He blocks with his Eternal Witness and takes no damage. I then pass to Ren.
Ren plays an island and then moves to combat. He attacks me with his Yavimaya Elder, who is now a 4-3 with Trample thanks to Stonebrow. I declare no blocks and take 4 damage. In his second main phase, Ren casts Jihora of the Gitu, and then passes turn to Neil.
Neil plays a Tainted Isle and then casts Solemn Simulacrum. He searches his library for a mountain and puts it into play tapped. He then passes the turn, to which Alex responds by sacrificing his Polluted Delta to find a godless shrine, losing a life in the process. He then activates Thrasios' ability, revealing an Alchemist's Refuge and putting it into play tapped.
I play a Forest and then pass to Martin with 11 mana open, not suspicious in the slightest.
I begin my turn by casting Ugin's Nexus, which upsets everybody at the table. Alex then bargains with Ren, and a 1-turn truce is agreed upon. He then casts Cyclonic Rift with the overload cost paid, with the Nexus still on the stack, to which Ren responds by sacrificing his Yavimaya Elder to draw a card and search his library for a forest and a mountain, before putting them into his hand. He then activates Joyra's ability, suspending Hamlet-back Goliath with 4 time counters on it. Cyclonic Rift then resolves, and everybody other than Alex puts all of their non-land permanents into their hands. Finally, Ugin's Nexus resolves, and I discard down to 7 before passing the turn.
Ren removes a time counter from his Goliath in his upkeep and then plays a Forest. He then casts Sakura Tribe Elder, replays his Simic Signet, and recasts Jora the Gitu, before passing to Neil.
For his turn, Neil recasts Nightscape Familiar and Solemn Simulacrum, searching his library for a swamp and putting it onto the battlefield tapped. He then passes the turn, and Alex activates Thrasios' ability, revealing Lightning Greaves as the top card of his library and putting it into his hand.
In my turn, I play a Windswept Heath and then cast Tymna the Weaver. I move to combat and attack Martin with Thrasios, dealing him 1 damage. In my second main phase, Tymna's ability triggers, and I pay 1 life to draw 1 card. I then discard down to 7 and pass the turn.
I start my turn by playing Darksteel Citadel, and then recast Chromatic Lantern and Breya Ethereum Shaper. I move to my end step, and Ren sacrifices his Sakura Tribe Elder to put an island into play from his library.
In his upkeep, Ren removes another time counter from his Hamlet-back Goliath. He plays a mountain and then casts Stonebrow Croson Hero again. Ren then passes to Neil with just enough mana left up to cast his commander if needed.
Neil plays Shinka, the Blood-Soaked Keep, and casts Attrition. Everybody agrees that this is something that definitely needs to be dealt with, but nobody provides a solution to it. Not yet finished, Neil casts Sidisi, Undead Vizier. This finally pushes Alex into casting the Abrupt Decay that we all know he has in hand, destroying Attrition before Neil has a chance to use it. Sidisi resolves, and Neil sacrifices his Solemn Simulacrum to Sidisi's Exploit ability. He searches his library for a card and puts it into his hand, and then draws a card as a result of Solemn Simulacrum's ability. In Neil's end step, Alex activates Thrasios' ability and puts an island into play from the top of his library.
I play an island and then cast Mind's Dilation. I then cast Lightning Greaves and attach them to Thrasios, before passing the turn to Martin.
In my turn, I recast Slowbad Goblin Tinkerer, which triggers Alex's Mind's Dilation. I reveal Scourglass as being on top of my library, which Alex chooses to cast for free. I then recast Kuldotha Forgemaster and move to combat. I attack Alex with Breya and my 2 Thopter tokens, and Alex decides to block Breya with his Birds of Paradise. He takes 2 damage from the Thopters, and I proceed to my post-combat main phase. I sacrifice my Ugin's Nexus to Slowbad to give Breya indestructible, and allowing me to take an extra turn after this one. I go to my second turn and sacrifice both of my Thopters and Breya to search my library for an artifact thanks to the Forgemaster. I find Darksteel Forge and put it into play. I then cast Nevinyor's Disc, triggering both Alex and his Mind's Dilation. I reveal the top card of my library as being Ash Barrens, which remains in exile. Not quite finished, I cast Doretti, Ingenious Iconoclast, and use his +1 ability to create a 1/1 construct with Defender. I then pass the turn to Ren.
Ren plays a Simic Guildgate, and then remembers to remove the penultimate time counter from his suspended creature. He then plays Frost Titan, which triggers Mind's Dilation. Ren reveals a mountain, which I am unable to steal. Frost Titan enters the battlefield, and Ren chooses to stop Martin's disc from untapping during his next untap step. He then casts Control Magic targeting Martin's Forge Master. Martin asks Ren if he will stop being mean to him if he doesn't sacrifice the Forge Master in response, and Ren agrees. He then passes turn.
For his turn, Neil casts Grave Pact, which triggers Mind's Dilation. Neil reveals a Shizo, Death's Storehouse, causing Alex to whiff for a third time. Poor Alex. Neil then casts Call to the Kindred, targeting Sidisi. He then moves to his end step where, as you guessed it, Alex activates Thrasios. He reveals Scavenging Ooze and puts it into his hand before moving to his turn.
I play a Hinterland Harbour and then cast Revelark for its revoke cost. It immediately dies, and I return Eternal Witness and Birds of Paradise to the battlefield. Eternal Witness triggers, and I return Cyclonic Rift to my hand. With enough mana left open to cast the Rift for its overload cost, I pass the turn to Martin.
I play Seat of the Synod and activate Doretti's -1 ability, sacrificing my construct to destroy Sidisi. Grave Pact triggers, and everybody else sacrifices a creature too. I sacrifice Slowbad, Ren sacrifices Joyra, and Alex sacrifices Eternal Witness. Next I cast Hannah, Ship's Navigator, which causes Mind's Dilation to trigger. The top card of my library turns out to be Tezzeret the Seeker, which Alex swiftly casts. I then cast Aethersworn Agitator and pass the turn.
In his upkeep, Ren removes the final time counter from his Hamelt back giant and casts it without paying its mana cost. This triggers Mind's Dilation, and Ren reveals Woodland Bellower as the card which he is about to draw. I cast the Bellower and search my library for Voice of Resurgence, putting it into play. Hamelback Goliath then enters the battlefield, and Ren continues his turn. He plays a Rootbound Crag and then casts Alngarth's Marauders. This puts 4 counters on his Goliath, making it a 10-10. Ren then casts his Commander, putting an additional 6 counters on the Goliath. Ren then moves to combat and forgets that Hamelback Goliath only entered this turn. He swings with the Goliath, Frost Titan, Stonebrow, and the Forge Master at me, using Frost Titan's ability to prevent Alchemist's Refuge from untapping in my next upkeep. Not wanting to be knocked out the game, I cast Cyclonic Rift for its overload costs once again. Everyone except me returns their non-land permanents to their hands, and Ren discards down to 7 before passing turn.
Neil plays an island and then casts Rooftop Storm. This triggers Mind's Dilation, and Neil reveals Bajuka Bog, once again depriving Alex of a castable permanent. He then uses Rooftop Storm to replay his Nightscape Familiar and to cast Undead Warchief. He then passes the turn to Alex.
In my turn, I equip Skullclamp to Tymna, and then go to combat. I attack Ren with Woodland Bellower, Voice of Resurgence, and Tymna, dealing him 11 damage and gaining me 3 life. In my second main phase, I lose 1 life and draw 1 card as a result of Tymna's ability, and then cast Selesnya Signet. Next, I cast Scavenging Ooze and use Tezzeret's +1 ability to untap both of my signets. I then cast Training Grounds, which then allows me to activate Thrasios' ability for only 2 mana. I reveal Treasure Cruise as being on top of my library, and put it into my hand. I then pass to Martin.
I recast Nevinyor's Disc, causing Mind's Dilation to trigger. I reveal Filigree Angel as the next card in my library, which Alex decides to cast. He gains 18 life when the Angel enters the battlefield, which is pretty good considering it didn't cost him anything to play. I then recast Chromatic Lantern and use it to cast Goblin Welder before passing the turn.
Ren begins his turn by playing a forest and casts Urabrask the Hidden. He then recasts Frost Titan, uses its Enter the Battlefield trigger to tap down my Angel. Moving to combat, Ren attacks me with Urabrask and Tezzeret with the Frost Titan, tapping down my Scavenging Ooze with the Frost Titan's ability. I block Frost Titan with Birds of Paradise and take 4 damage. Ren then passes turn.
In his turn, Neil casts Beacon of Unrest, causing Mind's Dilation to trigger. Darksteel Ingot is revealed and Alex casts the indestructible Mana Rock. Beacon of Unrest then resolves and Neil targets Sidisi in his own graveyard, to which Alex responds by exiling it with his Scavenging Ooze. The spell fizzles and Neil moves to combat. He attacks Tezzeret with both of his creatures and Alex chooses not to block. Tezzeret leaves the battlefield and Neil passes to Alex. As usual, Alex activates Thrasios, revealing Prairie Stream and putting it into play. He then activates Thrasios again, this time putting Jace, Vin's Prodigy, into his hand. Not yet finished, Alex activates Thrasios for a third time, putting Deathrite Shaman into his hand. He then activates Thrasios one final time, putting Growing Rites of Itlamog into his hand.
For my turn, I cast Growing Rites of Itlamog. I look at the top 4 cards of my library and find no creatures to reveal. How unfortunate. I then cast Treasure Cruise, drawing 3 cards, and I play a Plains. I then ask Martin what his favourite dashboard confessional song is and vindicate his Nev's disc. Everybody cried out in despair as the board wipe is removed from the battlefield and I move to combat. And I attack Ren with the same creatures as last time, dealing him yet another 11 damage and gaining me another 3 life. I lose 1 life in order to draw a card from Tymna's ability, and then cast Jace, Varin's Prodigy, which enters tapped thanks to Urabrask. In my end step, Growing Rites of Itlamog transforms into Itlamog, Cradle of the Sun. I then pass turn to Martin.
In my turn, I recast my commander, which triggers Mind's Dilation. I reveal Orcam Dagson, which Alex casts for free. I hate Mind's Dilation so much. With nothing else to do, I pass to Ren.
For his turn, Ren casts Control Magic, targeting my Scavenging Ooze. This causes Mind Dilation to trigger, and Ren exiles Vivid Crag. I cast Mortify on Control Magic once it is resolved, and Ren lets the ooze return to its controller without activating its ability in response. Not to be deterred, Ren casts Sword of the Animus and equips it to his Frost Titan. He then moves to combat and attacks me with the Titan, tapping down Jace with the Titan's ability. He then searches his library for an island and puts it into play tapped. I take 7 damage, and Ren then casts Slither Muse and passes turn to Neil.
Neil starts his turn by recasting Grave Pact, which triggers Mind's Dilation. The top card of Neil's library is revealed to be Perplex, which Alex casts to counter Grave Pact. What a pity. Neil then casts Volition Reigns, targeting Scavenging Ooze. Everybody wants some scoos. In response, Alex taps Itlamog to add 8 green mana to his mana pool and casts Dig Through Time. He doesn't find an answer though, and Scavenging Ooze moves to its 3rd controller of the game. Alex then uses his remaining 2 floating mana to activate Thrasios' ability, putting Avacyn's Pilgrim into his hand. Neil moves to combat, attacking Alex with Undead Warchief and Nightscape Familiar. Alex takes the damage and then activates Thrasios' ability twice. He puts Glacial Fortress onto the battlefield and Craterhoof Behemoth into his hand. The rest of the table shudders and Alex moves to his turn.
I start my turn by casting Vanishment, putting Urabrask on top of Ren's library. I then cast Craterhoof Behemoth, giving all my creatures +8/+8 and trample until end of turn. I move to combat and attack Ren and Martin for lethal damage, and Neil for 9 with Thrasios. Neil takes the damage and I gain 11 life from Tymna's lifelink. I then return Ren and Martin's permanents to them, cast Tireless Tracker, cast Avacyn's Pilgrim, and pass the turn.
In his turn, Neil casts Army of the Damned, creating 13 2/2 zombies. Unfortunately for Neil, they enter the battlefield tapped. Oh dear. He then plays Is It Boilerworks, returning an island to his hand, and passes the turn.
For my turn, I cast Phantasmal Image, having it enter the battlefield as a copy of Craterhoof Behemoth. I then turn my board sideways, crushing Neil and winning the game.
Well, that's it for another episode. We hope that you enjoyed this game as much as we did. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more EDH gameplay videos like this, and feel free to leave us a comment down below. See you next time!